Hello and welcome to Love Fools with me, your host, Terri Lee-Shield, where we are hopelessly devoted to exploring and embodying the universal language of love. Love Fools is brought to you by Love School, where we explore loving self, others, and everything. Join us there for deeper exploration at www.loveschool.uk. Now for today's episode. Hello, welcome to this brand new Love Fools podcast. Yay! Wow, thank you so much for listening. It's a royal we because I'm by myself today. I'm back. But I spontaneously last month decided to relaunch Love Fools, and you might, if you haven't caught the first episode of the relaunch, it was actually an interview I did with Mari Spidberg Craig about small steps to wellness, and that it is up on our YouTube and Spreaker channel, and this is the first fresh recording that I am making for Love Fools as its own podcast. So thank you so much for listening. If you haven't heard me before, I'm Terri Lee-Shield. I am host of this Love Fools podcast and Love School. At Love Fools, we are exploring and embodying the universal language of love. And over at Love School, other courses, and we explore what it means to love self, others, and life. So things are a little bit different today now with the new format of the podcast. So previously, Love Fools was connected with She Speaks Talk Radio, which was a collaborative project that I absolutely loved. It was absolutely brilliant. But for various different reasons, it just kind of didn't come together. There was like a change in the organizer, and it kind of just lost a little bit of momentum. And that coincided with some personal situations in my family life, which just meant that the podcast recording just stopped. It didn't happen, and it wasn't a priority. And I've just been getting a bit back on track. I love the podcast idea, and I love the freedom of having a bit of a ramble with you, having a bit of a chat, covering a bit more in-depth things that come up. I love interviewing people, so I thought, you know what, I'm going to bring it back. And I already had a couple of recordings done. So if you are new and listening and you hear reference to She Speaks and you think, what is She Speaks? Check it out. It's still on Spreaker. She Speaks was a collaborative project where it was like a radio station where it was only women. It was women talking, and I love that idea because very often, I know there is a bit more mix, isn't there, in like radio now, but very often it's men that we hear talk and present in radio shows. So this was a little bit different for us women to have a chance to take over the radio waves for a while. And I did love that idea very much. Like I say, so if you hear any references to She Speaks, by me or by in a couple of the pre-recorded interviews. So one of them was with Mari, who I released last month, and there's the next episode that'll be coming up is a pre-record that I did with Julie Brown about boundaries, which is brilliant. It was a brilliant podcast. And so the old format, what we used to do with She Speaks is I would record. So She Speaks was limited half hour for the shows. So I'd record that and then would kind of cut off. And then we'd do a bit of an extended with the guests that was exclusive for Love School. Because of everything that happened, I've been re-looking at everything, the offer of everything that I do, including Love School. So Love School is changing slightly how that works and operates as well, but just not stuff you need to be worried about or interested in, I'm sure, just behind the scenes stuff. So anyway, now rather than have the podcast be private in that community, I thought let's just have the podcast public. So that's what we're doing now. So now there is no time limit. Yay! There is no time limit on the podcast. There will be, sometimes it'll be me having a little ramble. And sometimes it will be with guests. And the theme, as always, will be around how do we love ourselves better? How do we love each other better? And how do we love life more? How do we embrace life and all the ups and downs and all that involves to have more love in our life. That is the theme for Love Fools, and we'll mix up the guests. There'll be I've got so many ideas. Honest, it's going to be really exciting. I've got some brilliant guests kind of in the pipeline. I'll be inviting on to chat about different kind of tangents and how we can look at love and how we can improve all them things I've just talked about. But I wanted to do a one with just me, a little rambler one again. One, because I have a lot of energy for what I'm about to talk about. This episode is going to be called Everything Cycles, and I've got a lot of energy to talk about this. And it's relevant to what is going on at Love School at the minute, kind of fits with that. And it feels also a bit like a theme that I've seen coming up in people's lives and social media. And I just kind of thought this would be a great topic to ramble about. So I hope that's enough of a previous intro that you understand what we were and what we're going to be now. So the new episodes are going to be released on a Saturday afternoon, the last Saturday of the month. So at the minute, they're just going to be monthly. If I manage to get everything kind of sorted and settled, then we might get back to 2 weekly. But for now, it's going to be once a month. They'll be released at 2:00 on a Saturday, the last Saturday of the month, and we'll see how that goes. So yes, I am really excited to get talking about Everything Cycles. So first of all, Everything Cycles is a permaculture principle, and that was when I first kind of heard the term, because those of you that don't know, prior to me starting Love School, this is all part of my cycle. So I hold spaces, I mentor people, I share all the wisdom I have gathered around natural holistic healing. And that has been my cycle of healing that I took from I call it my previous life. It was this life. It was in this body of Terri, but I used to be a photographer. I was trained as a designer and I was a photographer. I went through some crazy stuff and was forced, really had to just address me, my life, my health, my well-being. And so I went into a cycle of healing. And part of that was me changing my career, changing my how I'd show up in the world. So I actually retrained as a permaculture designer and started working in the community. I used to do community meal, a community garden, set up a community fridge. It was all based around food and community. This idea of wellness, of connecting with people, and wellness, connecting with your body, basically because that's what I had to do. And what I do now, this is evolved into me wanting to share everything I've learned over, that was 12 years. I kind of did that initial shift. Everything that I've had to go through, learn, adapt, evolve into, practice, experiment with, is now being shared through Love School and through these podcasts and through the work I do for mentorship and the other exciting things that I do. So Everything Cycles was something that I heard as a permaculture principle, but it's kind of been like a theme of my healing, and I can go on many tangents about it. Everything Cycles has so many connotations, so many interpretations, and it's almost like a law of nature. It's an unchangeable, unshakable truth of life on earth, of our existence and evolution that we can't really escape from. And that's why it's a permaculture principle, by the way. It's something to consider when designing things. Consider that everything cycles. Everything comes back around in a slightly different way. And there's lots of visuals and things to that when I'm looking at kind of design or trying to explain this in other ways, which, by the way, if this is something you're interested in, if you latch onto this I did, or you're I want to see, I'm a visual person, I want to see these visuals, comment, let me know, give me feedback, because I have stuff I'm willing to share with you. I've got visuals that I use to kind of explain this principle, and I'm really happy to share that with you as like a PDF or something if you're a visual person you want to see. But this idea of cycles just exists in life, in nature, okay? Like the Fibonacci spiral is how we grow, how things like develop and expand. I love the idea of like an onion, right? Peeling the layers of an onion that go deeper and deeper and deeper, and they're like smaller and smaller cycles of the same thing, or larger and larger, because obviously the cycles are created as the onion grows, like a tree. If you cut a tree down, you see the circles, don't you, in the trunk of how it's grown, and the different, each year has been a cycle. The years are cycles, the seasons are cycles. As we are moving around, we set the moon cycles around us. We are subject to all these cycles all the time. And I mean, you don't have to dive as deeply into it as what I did, because I've just got one of those like obsessive creative minds that like latches onto certain things. But this goes deep, like deep. And that's what I'm kind of going to touch on in the podcast. And that's why I'm a little bit excited that I've got the extended space, because I might go off on a few tangents. I have planned, I've got a couple of notes. If you watch it on YouTube, hello. If you see me looking like this, it's because I'm looking at my notes, if in case I've gone off on a tangent and forget things. If you're listening, sorry, that's not going to make much sense. But if you want to see me talk as well as listening, go over to YouTube. They're on YouTube. Love School UK. But yes, these cycles are something that we're just subject to. There's no getting away from it. You can't stop them. You can't control them. Can't even deny them, because they happen. They exist. They are real. And as humans, I think we have these like growth cycles that we go through, and we're kind of aware of them, aren't we? We're like almost like this on you, right? So you've got infancy where you're really small, and then toddler where you start to get a little bit bigger and you learn how to walk and talk, and then you've got that period like where you're at preschool and then school, then you hit puberty and teenage years, and then you've got your early 20s where you're expanding out in the world and you're allowed to do what you want because you're considered an adult, but you've actually got no clue what you're doing. Then you got like your 30s where you're like, actually I've got some experience now, I've got a bit of an idea what I'm doing. And you get older, and then they're just examples of how different cycles we go through, rites of passage, stages of development. And one of the significant things that I noticed was trauma cycles, and that's what a little bit I'm going to go into now. And these happen in like a few different ways. So again, I'm going to probably go off on a few tangents, but hopefully you'll get really into it and you won't mind my tangents. So one of them, which was a really kind of cool insight that I came across and that was confirmed with a friend who it was a few years ago. We were really doing data, collecting data on ourselves, which actually, by the way, just to chuck that in there, is a really cool way of monitoring these cycles. As a woman, I keep a record of my menstrual cycle. Also keep a track of the moon cycles, because actually the moon cycle really affects my energy. I'm a fire sign, which I've seemed to have observed. Fire signs and full moon have a lot of energy, which is why at like 8:30 at night when I'm recording this, it's around a full moon. I've got a lot of energy. I'm like, right, I'm going to talk and get this out. And when the new moon comes, I'm very different. I am chilled. At 8:30 at night, I would not be recording this. I might be introspecting, writing a journal. That's just one little thing that I noticed, that I don't know whether that is specifically a male female thing. Like a lot of women who I connect with find this connection with the moon and they're really into it and they find it really exciting and interesting. The men not particularly so much, but I'm not making a judgment of that either way. I'm just saying that's something I noticed. But obviously as a woman, tracking your menstrual cycle, like your hormones up and down and all that, can be really beneficial just to understand your body better. But one thing that we noticed when we were tracking this data of our moods and energy and things like that is trauma cycles. And it was actually my friend who really pinpointed this, because she was like really meticulous with her data. And we were chatting about it one day, and I was like, I think my trauma comes around. And when we actually, I'm getting all jeebies remembering it, when we actually identified that and started to pay attention to it, it seems like it was definitely a truth for me. When I've observed it in other people, and when I confirmed it with other people who've done similar things, and it's one of the bases of life design and that I do through my mentorship and I teach at Love School, is about this collecting data of yourself so you can observe these patterns and see these cycles, was that there would be certain times in the year, doesn't matter what was going on, things might have been going really well, I might have been feeling really great, then suddenly I would just start like remembering all this old shit, like getting flashbacks or feeling exhausted or putting on weight or losing weight, getting really irritable, breaking up, making up with people. And it was like, actually, when did my trauma happen in the past? And what we noticed was that there was this cycle from a traumatic experience that hadn't been processed. So now, as I've been able to observe that and process my trauma and stuff, one, I'm aware that there might be a flare up at certain times because of past trauma, but actually, because I've been actively doing this for several years now and I'm aware of my cycles, each year they've come up, I've processed them, and more that's come up, like the layers of that onion, I'm actually not subject to the same cycle so much. As we go through life, we might get new traumas, but because I'm aware of this cycle now, I can almost like prepare for it, and it's been super helpful on a healing journey and understanding myself and other people in relationships as well. So that was something that we noticed. Like, so for example, I had a serious trauma that would happen in the summer, and around that same time, like just when summer was coming in, the peak of like July, when the schools were breaking up and summer holidays were starting, and it was really hot and really light, I would get really quite manic. And then, and I'd have too much energy almost. It was really stressful, and I would burn out, and I would get overwhelmed and all this. And then I realized when I traced it back, oh, that literally links to a really serious trauma I had. One of the most serious traumas that had this ripple effect in my life again, again, again. And then because I was able to like trace it back to that original trauma, and because I hadn't realized that that cycle would come round to be identified again and again and again, I was then able to trace when all these other traumas happened at the same time. And it was like, oh my goodness. I had been re traumatizing myself because of the symptoms, the triggers, the cycle of my trauma that was coming up that I didn't understand, that was causing all of them symptoms that I explained, that I would then respond not very well to. And it would then cause another situation and another situation. So actually, I was being traumatized pretty much in patterns around the same time. So there's a lot of power in understanding that. It meant that I could understand my cycle, exactly prepare, I could start peeling back the layers of these traumas, trace back that cycle, and be able to release and heal the trauma that needed to be processed and released and healed. So that was really interesting. That was like one of the cycles that I became super aware of, that was beneficial to a healing journey and to love myself better. And then also in relationships, because once you're aware of that, it's like, well, actually, sometimes stuff comes up for me this time of year. And it doesn't even have to be something, it's not something we're conscious of. I think because our body has this, our body has muscle memory, our body has like, nervous system memory, but our subconscious mind stores everything, right? Even if it's not present in our conscious mind, it's stored there. So the trigger for that can be anything. Like I might have mentioned before, stuff like the temperature, the smells, the colors that are around because of the plants or lack of plants or whatever, where the sun is, how much light there is, the all of these messages that our body is picking up on a subconscious level can activate that cycle awareness, even if we're not aware of it in ourselves. So that was really quite, that was kind of the juicy part. That was where I first realized, like, wow, there's something in this idea of looking at cycles and at patterns and cycles. So now I'm going to go a bit deeper. Even deeper, she says. So, like I said, this was something that was a bit of an obsession. Like, as in, once I realized that and the power of that for me in my healing journey, the choice it gave us, the options it gave us, it's become like an important part of my healing and my life. That cycle I was in. Now I'm coming out of that healing cycle because it's not so active in this, because I've done a lot of the work. So I'm now entering into a new cycle where I don't have to be aware of my past cycles, if that makes sense. But that's part of the reason why I really want to express it in this, in right now in this podcast time, because it's still like partly alive in us, but I'm very aware that I'm not in it anymore. I've kind of gained the wisdom, and I'm ready to share that and then kind of move on from it, if you like, because I'm not tracking them so diligently, and I'm not recording all the data, and I'm not keeping as vigilant records as I once was, because now it's integrated. Now I embody it. Now I just kind of know that, and I'm aware of that, and I'm probably going to be reminded of it, I'm sure, down the line, because it's still going to be a part of my growth and progress. But what is really interesting to note as well is, like, our body cycles. Our body recycles itself. So every 7 years, you've got a brand new body. It doesn't obviously happen instantly. It happens, you know, I can't think of the word. Incrementally? Incrementally? Is that the right word? It happens incrementally. But there isn't a cell in our body that exists more than 7 years. So every 7 years, you've got a brand new body. And that's how your body cycles as well. So I genuinely think once you can do some of this work, like, the cells that were alive in me 7 years ago, that were being constantly triggered as part of that cycle, that they don't exist anymore. So the cells that have kind of, which is how we have these body cycles, and how we can release our trauma and things when we work through it, to know that we're not the same. I'm not the same person I was 7 years ago. I'm a completely new person. I have a completely new way of thinking, being, doing, and my body is different. I have different cells in my body. Every part of my body, my hair is different because it grows out and I've cut it off. you know, so that was just something I wanted to throw in there. But yes, to go a bit deeper. Excuse me, I'm just gonna have a little drink. When I started to, like, dive into this, like, proper deep, it got a bit creepy. So just to give a little bit of context, the reason I wanted to do this as well, and to publish this particular topic, is because it relates to a lot of the content I'm currently publishing, which relates to a course that I'm offering at Love School. That course is an inner child and reparenting course, and the content that I'm sharing is based on, like, our Love School pages and that sort of thing. The blogs and things I'm writing and sharing are all based around this idea of doing inner child work and reparenting, because of how significant this was. The healing process, I mean, of, like, working with my inner child and reparenting myself. Because when we start looking at ourselves as a bigger cycle, and we talk about things like generational trauma, we talk about things like family karma, they're like terms that you might have heard, like, bandied about, especially if you're in spiritual mindset or in spiritual communities, even psychology, they talk about family patterns and all that sort of thing. Being part of a family is one of our cycles. We are raised by our parents, who were raised by their parents, who were raised by their parents. And when we're kids, we are just absorb, and basically we're absorbing our experiences, and we're just taking on these behaviours without question. And if that serves you well, that's fine. But generally, what I've found, again, as another cycle, a lot of people around, normally between the age of, like, 28, 27, 28, late 20s, to mid-30s have this opening, awakening, whatever you want to call it, to how much they've been living in these cycles of being that what they learned in childhood, basically can be triggered by, especially if you become a parent, if one of your siblings becomes a parent. There can be lots of different triggers why that awareness happens, but when it does, it kind of like opens you up to like all the stuff you've just taken on, that you've done automatically, that you've not been, that you've been living a life that you haven't designed yourself. And it's like, well, why? Where does that come from? And it comes from your childhood programming, your childhood conditions, your childhood conditioning. And depending on your childhood, it's not necessarily a malicious thing, right? It just happens. Like you're there, you're an infant, you don't even know anything, you're just born, you're like totally vulnerable, you are subject to your parents and what they think about life and what they want to teach you and what they're going to show you, and your schooling and what schooling wants to teach you and what schooling wants to show you. And you're just this sponge absorbing it all from a limited perspective, and you just take it on. And then as you go through puberty and your mind kind of changes and you become more independent, you might kind of rebel out of that and try new things, but actually what you do is just replicate patterns that you were shown, the cycles that you were subject to. And the amount of revelations, honestly, that like I say, sometimes it's quite creepy. And I remember saying to so Julie, who is on the next episode, is my boundaries coach, or was, like, specifically at this time as well, when I was kind of coming out of this deep dive into it. And I remember saying to her once, like, why does it always come back to me beloved parents and me bloody childhood? She laughed and she just said, I don't know, it just does, weird, isn't it? And it's so weird. So obviously this is a bit of a flip comment, but I bet you every single recurring problem you have in your life, right? Every stress, every habit that you can't break, every relationship thing that keeps coming around, trace it back. It'll trace back to your childhood. It'll trace back to something that happened at school, or that was said to you by a teacher or a parent, or it always comes back to a mirror of these childhood experiences. And I'm not going to go off on one about inner child and reparenting, because it's a thick subject and I've done a whole course about it. So if you're really interested and you want to be able to do it, learn about it, buy the course. It's like dead good value. I'll link it up in the comments if you want to have a go at that course. Or if you just want to like dibble dabble, I've done some like small videos and that will be over on the Love School page, where you can have a look at some little snippets of information if you're not quite ready to dive in. But just everything, like from my choice of partners, from the relationship types, from every single pattern that I had to do with my health, every single pattern had to do with my mental health, all of it could trace back to these early learnings, these early cycles, and learning how to understand them cycles, to be compassionate around them, to adapt to them, to heal them and release from them, has been like really important to freeing myself from them symptoms that were really imprisoning my mind and body. And it's really fascinating. So I'm just going to go a little bit lighter for a minute. So everything cycles also relates to like a lot of the stuff I was doing in the garden when I was running, growing food and doing community projects and things like that. What I noticed there in the patterns and cycles and the behaviors of people was really quite significant. So you know all this already, right? You'll know all this already. So just as a little challenge, right? Just for a year, just notice what people do. And a year goes by really quickly as you get older, doesn't it? It like gets quicker and quicker every year. So it sounds like a long time. I can't watch for a year, but like, whoosh, where's in another year has gone by? But just watching people, right? I'll quickly explain the cycle of people's behavior in the country I live in. It might be slightly different in your country, but it's not that different. So we'll start with New Year, right? Everyone has all these new intentions. They focus on improvement, go to the gym or join a new club or whatever it might be, starting a new business, thinking about business ideas. Then they do that for a little while. Then it comes around to Valentine's Day, so everybody's focus goes around love and relationships and looking at your relationships. Then it comes around to like Easter time and springtime comes and we start to put more action in place, and then it, all that activity kind of dies off a little bit, and then it kind of sparks back up when it gets around to solstice, and then it gets lighter and brighter and all the flowers and the trees start budding, and then it gets towards summer and everyone's planning holidays and talking about getting fit and in shape again and barbecues and going to the beach, and there's lots of activity. Then it goes, you know this, right? So I mean, I don't have to go through every single holiday, do I? But you get the idea. Then it's, then it's October and Halloween and bonfire night, and then Christmas, and then the cycle starts again. But people will have like the same celebrations, the same conversations, the same, the same year after year after year after year after year, generation after generation after generation. These cycles go on and on and on, and they have done for like a long time now, haven't they? Even if they kind of slightly change and alter, it might be slightly different trends or slightly different culture changes and all the rest of it. But the cycles continue, and we become the product of those cycles. We become the product of that because it's what is like normal to us and what we're used to. And then when we were like gardening and stuff, you can watch the life cycle of different plants, and you can watch the progression of different projects and how people come and go and all that sort of thing. Once you can like observe these cycles, it can really help how you adapt, how you cope, how you understand life. When you know that literally everything does cycle and everything goes around and around, and you can plan, you can expect, because you become so predictable. So predictable. Um, yeah, sorry, I was just reading my notes there. Sorry if I went a bit quiet because I wanted to talk about. Sorry, I've got loads and loads of notes, but I want to just pick up on a couple of highlights. So that, I hope, is a really good example of how we like adopt these, we'll call them traditions. Traditions are essentially patterns and cycles, like Christmas traditions, or if you have another religion, Eid editions, or I can't think of any other religious celebrations off the top of my head now from different cultures. Sorry, don't mean to offend anyone, but I'm speaking from my own perspective. But these cycles and patterns is, and observing those ones are, I'm hoping, really illustrating the point what I want to get to, right? But what I noticed as well is how deep that can go in relation to things we didn't even think about. So, for example, right, this is really quite intimate and personal, but I'm going to share it anyway. One of my traumas was sexual abuse when I was young. And I found, well, I didn't find out, I knew I had it. I had a diary from one of my family members who passed away. I had some of their stuff, and I'd kept it for like years. So we're talking like a decade later. I'm like sorting out some stuff, and I come across it and I thought, oh, it's been like 10 years since I've gone now. Is it okay to read this diary? And I decided it was. And it really was quite shaky when I read this because it was like reading my own life. Freaky. Like really, really freaky, I'm telling you. And I think because the way our memories work and stuff, we don't, certainly in my family, we didn't talk in detail about their child, like the childhood of, like my parents or their siblings or my grandparents or their siblings. Like we didn't really talk. It would be like slight little anecdotal stories and that sort of thing. Nobody ever really talked in depth about their childhood or what happened. It just wasn't discussed. And reading this diary was like I say, it gave me it really gave me shivers because it was like, oh, this is like reading my own diary, but this is like 50 years. You're talking like 20 or 30 years before I was even born. This person had these experiences that were pretty much exactly the same as mine. And I'm getting all jeebies now when I'm talking about it. That was really, really like eye opening and really, really creepy. But it just showed me how deep this could go when we're talking about things like family karma and generational trauma and stuff like that. So there was no way that I could consciously know what happened to that family member all that time ago. Sorry, I just had a horrible thought there that I wasn't even recording, but I am recording, so there was no way that I could know consciously what happened to that family member, right? Yet my life was just another cycle of theirs, basically. It was slightly different. I was born in a different time. I had different parents. We lived in a different place. I had different friends. Different friends had different names, but the characters, the themes, the experiences were the same. Do, do, do. And that really kind of like made me realize how deep our human experience is and can be. And then also the power of changing that, the power of the personal empowerment that I can have by healing that. And it's my belief, I mean, I don't know, I don't have children, but if I did have children, I'm not going to make the same, I don't want to call them mistakes, but my children are not going to have the same experiences I have because I have now all of this awareness and I've shifted those cycles, I've shifted those patterns. I'm only keeping the ones that are beneficial. I'm only creating this tradition, creating this new cycle with the things that support, with the things that help me exist more fully. So then the theory is, or my theory is, that then if I was to have children, that they would be in a different cycle. They would not be in a cycle of abuse or neglect or trauma. They would be in a cycle of thriving and wellness and evolution, right? In theory. Does that make sense? Let me know in the comments what you think about that, because I'm just playing with ideas, of course. Of course I am just playing with ideas. There's no way to know. There's no way I can even know, is that, because I don't know if I had children, what their experiences would be. But then when you think of like what we're taught about religion in different religions, lots of different religions talk about karma, don't they? Reincarnation. Um, like that sort of pattern, that sort of cycle, death and rebirth and passing things along. And I just find that really, really like interesting, especially at the time. I mean, obviously, it wasn't always jolly when I was figuring this all out. I can see it from a different perspective now. I've gone through it all, but at the time it was really insightful and has really helped to understand and shape almost how I look at life. So I'm going to show you, talk about some slightly different examples of how I then put that knowledge into practice in my life, which is not always easy, by the way. So when bad things happen, bad's not the best word to use, is it? And things that happen that I would prefer didn't happen, that cause me stress or pain or discomfort or suffering, and I feel angry or want to blame people or want to see other people have justice and suffer, which is something that, as somebody who experienced injustice trauma and who has to work through that a lot, often, is definitely one of my cycles. One of the ways that I can find peace is knowing that every single thing that I have done or not done has eventually come around, and I have had to work through the consequences of that choice, one way or another. Same, and like I say, same with even family and stuff. So I think this is where, like, some religions do, and they say if you don't work through your karma, like, passes on to your children, and you just reincarnate and you'll go through that again and again until somebody deals with that karma, until you've dealt with that karma. Like, I genuinely think that's what it is. And in many, many small ways, I witnessed that again and again and again. So I kind of, to me, know that to be true, that there will be choices that I make that will come around again from a different perspective in order for me to make a different choice, so I can fully understand the consequences of the choices that I make, whether that be positive or negative or however you want to look at it, doesn't matter, but they'll come around. Like something that happened recently. So the reason why I stopped my podcasts and things was because I had a lot of losses in my family, one after the other. So I had my nan, who I used to was really close to. My nan got ill and then died, and then just literally a couple of weeks after, my mum collapsed and had a stroke, and like a really serious one. She had to have lots of brain surgeries and stuff, and it was all really stressful. And my mum needed care, so I decided to. It was really triggering. I manage, that I'm still, have to be aware of my energy and all that. And I just couldn't focus on doing stuff like this. So I took time off and was going through the grief process, the grief cycle of losing my nan, the grief cycle of losing my mother as she once was. She's still alive, by the way. My mom is still alive now. She's doing really well. I still care for her. She is in her healing cycle now. She is healing, and I'm help supporting her with everything I've learned in my recovery for her recovery. But the person who my mother was, it does not exist anymore. That person has gone with the stroke, and there's a new person in. So there was a grief cycle I had to go through with that. And during that, so when my mum was like in hospital and having lots of surgeries and things, it was very stressful. And all of my healing has been natural. I've done it myself. I have sometimes trauma relating to the NHS, to trying to get support from the medical establishment and it not working out and being re-traumatized and blah, 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 blah. So I generally avoid the medical world. And then all of a sudden, I was thrust right into it for like a long time. Like, obviously, my nan was in hospital for a long time, and then my mum was having really serious surgeries, stuff that brain surgery, brain surgery and stuff. And you're just like, well, I don't know about this, but I know that that's a big deal, and it's got potentially serious consequences. So it was a lot to manage. And I went on Facebook one day. I hadn't really been expressing much. Like I say, I just kind of stopped doing a lot of what I was doing. But I went on and I was just expressing how disempowered I felt by dealing with medical people again, and how it was reminding me about how they take away our autonomy. They don't ask for consent. They'll just, do things. And I was struggling with that. And I just wanted to express it. So I went onto Facebook and I expressed, and I had a couple of people like make comments that, just really irked us at the time. Comments like, you create your own reality, and this reality is being created so you can make choices. I'm like, yes, well, fine, but that still doesn't mean that I want this situation or create this situation, and it's not my situation. It's my mother's situation, and I'm having to go through, and I'm having to advocate for it. It's really hard. And then somebody else made a comment about saying how we can always self-advocate, and we always have power, and we disempower ourselves. And yes, on some level that is true, okay? And I talk about that a lot. I do talk about that a lot. And even as I was posting that stuff, it's not as if I would deny that. It was just, that wasn't the reason I was posting it. I did not want advice. I was posting because I was saying, look, I'm going through this and it's really fucking hard. It's really challenging for me. And I just needed to express it. I needed to say it. I feel disempowered. I'm facing this challenge, and it's really difficult to advocate for somebody, and especially with the dynamic of the medical, professionals, and my history with them, and their knowledge that they had that I didn't, and all that. Anyway, I feel like I've gone a little bit off on one with this story, but what the reason I'm saying it is because the person who commented, who said to me, and this is how crazy this stuff gets with this everything cycles. We're always empowered. We can always self-advocate, blah, 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 is currently going through a situation where they are in the medical system, having to have serious surgery, and they have just posted how they feel disempowered, how they're not being listened to, how they don't feel they can self-advocate, how they're being ignored, how the power dynamic feels off. And when you see something and you're like, oh my God. So this is a little bit why I wanted to speak about what I'm speaking about today, because that to me was like a really good illustration of just how powerful this interconnected karmic cycles that we create with each other is. And so what I was at like first, what we were saying, like we always create our reality, blah, 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 blah. Like, yeah, we are always creating our reality. And on one level, the person who was then saying to me that advice or whatever she was trying to give me to tell me that I was misinterpreting my situation is now in not exactly the same situation, but a really similar situation, and is feeling in a really similar way how I felt, and felt to post that on Facebook. And so I had a choice. I had a choice of how I respond to her. And I chose to respond in a different way to what she responded to me. I changed the cycle because ain't no way I want to go through that feeling again. So I chose to respond from a different way and just send well wishes and to offer compassion and empathy. That was how I chose to respond. Whether or not that's going to end that cycle for me or for her, whatever, who knows. But I just thought it was a really great illustration of just how complex all this stuff can get with the cycles. But also then, like, I'm super aware of that now. That's why I seen it. And like, that's what I said at the beginning. Like, I'm embodied with that now. I didn't go out looking for that. That just came into my experience, and it was instantly, like, I just instantly had this knowing, oh my God, like that is a cycle that I went through, and it was not quite a year, be about 9 months since that happened. That's how long that cycle took. And I just think, wow, isn't that amazing? I just thought like that, those little smaller cycles of the things we say, flipping comments we might make, what we go through, and then each time that comes back around in one way or another. And it might be so also like the cycles might be from a different perspective. If you consider the Fibonacci spiral, every time that comes around, like it's going around and round, but it's not just going around in a circle, is it? Each time it goes around, it's expanded out. So our perspective of the cycle is different. So we're going through the same thing, but from a different perspective, or a similar thing from a different perspective. So every time it comes around, we're given a new perspective. We're given a new way of looking at the situation, and therefore a new choice of how we respond. And I think that's how we evolve, that's how we grow, and that's how we can change and break and move these cycles. And then I'm going to get, like, again, this is just one of my little theories. I also think, like, that's how, so for example, if you've evolved, right, if you've gone through these cycles and you've changed, like your entire body's changed, your mind's changed, your energy has changed. If you then have a child, I think that the DNA has changed. That child physically would be different. A child physically doesn't have the same genetic code that the child would have if you never changed those cycles. Like, I think, like, really, like, I'm not a medical person. I don't think medical people know enough about, like, DNA. I mean, I know they know really clever stuff about DNA. I don't, but I love genetics, and I would love if there was some way to, like, test and do this experiment to find out for sure. Don't know if there is, but I just think, like, that is like that. I just have this sense of knowing, like, that is the difference between consciously creating a life, consciously creating a child, and a child being created in our shadow, a child being created unconsciously, the child then having to live through the trauma that we didn't change, and then that can potentially be in generational lines, if that makes sense. Just having a drink. So, for example, when I was talking about when I read that diary of a family member, like, I have no way of knowing if their family member, if their parent or sibling went through a similar thing. I've no way of knowing that because those people aren't alive anymore to ask even. And even if I did ask, they might deny it or they might not remember. I don't know. But I've just got this really strong instinct that that is true, that likely either one of their parents or grandparents or aunties or uncles had the same experiences that we've had, and they just passed that experience on through the DNA to their children. Could be totally wrong, who knows? It's just an idea, isn't it? But I think it's an interesting one. Right, I've been talking quite a while now. I'm just going to check my notes and see if there's anything else I want to talk about this. Well, I probably could go off on a couple of things, but you know what? I feel like this is the end of this talking cycle. I'm feeling like that energy is kind of run through me and I've said what needs to be said. I would love to know what you think. It is just a bit of a babble, but it's based on, like, proper data, not scientifically gathered in a lab, but data that I've been collecting for, like, lots of years through lots of observations of myself and others and life. And like I say, this understanding, this wisdom, knowledge, learning, I've been able to adapt to many, many aspects of my life, and it has eased a lot of suffering. It's supported me to heal and grow and evolve. It has allowed for a better version of myself to emerge because I know myself better. I know my cycles. I know how I respond. And I know that I don't always have to be the same at all times. Sometimes you've got more energy than others, and I use that now. So, for example, like I was saying, like, now I've had all this talking energy, talk it out. Now it's like nearly 9 o'clock now. I'm feeling more rested because I've used that energy wisely instead of having all this pent up energy and probably not being able to sleep later because I didn't do anything with the energy that I had because it's full moon. I've used the energy and now I've, like, spoken it all out. Hopefully, hopefully creating something that's really interesting for you lot listening. Yeah, who knows? Well, thank you very much for listening. I would love, 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 love to know your comments, feedback, what you think. Have you had any experiences of cycles like this? Are there any cycles I've missed? Have you collected any data similar? Do you think this is a load of tosh? How do you think you could apply this knowledge of cycles to your healing or your relationships? Let me know in the comments. And like I said, if you're interested If you're interested in seeing this as a visual, I have a visual I'm very happy to share with you. So just let me know in the comments, just ask for a visual and I'll send it. I'll get it sent over one way or another. I guess we'll have to message and get emails. But anyway, I'll figure it out. I'm happy to send you the visual. If you're super interested in what I was talking about with the generational stuff and the inner child and the reparent, because that is a process of taking ownership of these cycles and finding out those core wounds, finding out those patterns, and then changing them. There's a course at Love School. If you go to loveschool.uk/innerchild, there's a course there. Like you say, it's really great value. I'm doing all of the Love School courses really accessibly priced because I want everyone to be able to benefit from this really, really beneficial healing tools and skills and understandings. So get yourself over there if you fancy that course. Even if that's out of your legal, like say you just want to dabble a little bit, follow us on Facebook and Instagram, which is both at loveschool.uk. There's content on there, little bite-sized bits of content that's going to give you a bit more. You know, if you're interested, like I say, it'll feed that curiosity you've got and learn a little bit more. Thank you for listening to this will be podcast episode number 20, which is following on from the She Speaks, but we'll call it like 2.0 2.0 episode of Love Fools. I have been Terri Lee-Shield. Thank you very much for listening. Goodbye. Thank you for listening to this episode of Love Fools, where we have been exploring and embodying the universal language of love. Love Fools is brought to you as part of Love School, where we explore what it means to love self, others, and everything. For more information, come and have a look at our site, www.loveschool.uk.